Wow, I love that song. I remember it used to be the opening song for so many of our services. Sanctuary means safe place. Are we a safe place for ourselves and for others? I think that's what this video is about, my coming to you today. Wednesday night faith lifts because I can know a principle, I can know what to do, but sometimes it's not easy to do that. I realize that sometimes the things that we hear from myself or other spiritual teachers, or we read in the Bible or other holy books, we know it's the right thing to do, but it just seems so hard to do it. Thus, a midweek faith lift. Because we want to, but we just don't seem to have the energy and the courage and the strength to do what we know we need to do. I'm inspired right now by a book by Howard Thurman, For the Inward Journey. And I watched a special recently, last week, on PBS about Howard Thurman and what a great man he was. And just his faith in God led him to so many places where he could be an influence, not just for his local community, but for the world. He studied under Gandhi, and he was a major influence on Martin Luther King. And when I think about what those men had to do and women had to do to have the strength to confront systemic racism, I'm going, wow, I want that kind of strength. I just want that kind of strength to just talk to my neighbors about fireworks. I want that kind of strength to talk to people I know that I'm a little out with. So I'm encouraged by his words. And he quotes the prophet Jeremiah. And in Jeremiah it says, "A curse on him who relies on man, who depends upon mere human aid. For he is like a desert shrub that never thrives, set in a solitary place in the steppes. But happy is he who relies on God, who has God for his confidence. For he is like a tree planted in a stream, sending his roots down into the water. He has no fear of scorching heat. His leaves are always green, and he goes on bearing fruit when all around him is barren and looks out on life with dry eyes." Wow. Howard Thurman goes on to tell a story of something that I've also heard, that there are actually trees in the Sahara that are green all the time. They're not part of an oasis, they're just green. Because thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago, what is now the Sahara was a jungle, an oasis of magnitude. And yet things began to dry up, but some trees didn't dry up, and that was, they're finding that was because their roots had gone so deep into the earth that they have access to underwater rivers that nothing else does. And so they draw from things that seem invisible. They draw from a nourishment that seems invisible. How can they be so lush in the middle of sand? That's what it's like to have a spiritual practice, that everything else is dry and foreign to us, and yet we can draw from something that is so deep and so nourishing that we don't dry out, we don't succumb to the environment. There's another story that I love to tell, and that is of an experiment done in Amherst University, or Amherst College, I should say. It was a college. It must have been, I don't know, horticulturists, Some silly experiment done by college students. I'm always amazed that some of the experiments and tests that I read about are done in colleges. And they decided to test how strong a pumpkin was. No, it was a squash. How strong is a squash? So they put bands around the squash, and they measured the bands and how much pressure was against the bands. And they noticed that the bands were about to break, and they'd add more bands and more bands and more bands. And finally, the squash broke the bands. It's like it broke out of its imprisonment. And when they decided to then dig into the earth and see what was going on with this squash, that it had so much strength, they noticed that the roots went not only down but out, and it went everywhere, and the root system was enormous. It was drawing from everything it could so that it could overcome its limitations. Well, that's what a spiritual practice does for us. A spiritual practice allows us to go deep below our fears, below our prejudices, below our doubts, below our habits, below our yeah-butses, to something that is still and nurturing and everlasting and always available, but we have to be willing to be still to go there. We have to be willing to be silent and listen and not come to God with our chatter. And not come to God with our, I can't stand this, and I don't know what's going on, and why don't you fix it? I mean, I'm not sure if you ever go there, but it has occurred in my head a few times. And yet, if I just stop the chatter, something within me goes deep. And I find a peace that passes understanding. And a courage that is not made up. And a love that is encompassing. And all is right with my world. And then I can go into my world and share a bit of that with others. And I can really understand why Jesus would say, I'm in the world, but I'm not of it. I'm not of this chatter. I'm not of this chaos. I'm not of this opinion. And why he could also say, I have water to offer you that you know not of, and you drink of this water and you'll never thirst again. It's all starting to make sense. So let's just take a deep breath and join Joel and I in turning ourselves again to that which is the one. The one life. That which is centered everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere, meaning it's centered in us. We are a center. We are a center of divine operation. And the divine operation is always for expanding its expression into reality, into creation. And we are a part of that. Oh. So let us find that center. And let us draw up into ourself, into our awareness, all that we know God is. And in so doing, we become a safe place for others to be heard, to be witnessed, to be healed. We become a sanctuary for God. Sanctuary means safe place, safe place. Our mind becomes a safe place. Our heart becomes a safe place. Our atmosphere is a safe place. We have become an oasis, a refuge, a witness, a sanctuary. Lord,
Lord, prepare me to be a sanctuary, pure and holy, tried and true. With thanksgiving, I'll be a living sanctuary.